breakdown. But take us on to more medical matters, David.
No, this is Debbie.
I beg your pardon, Debbie, sorry.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, now people might remember a letter that I wrote to the RCGP nearly a year ago now. There you go, you've got it on screen. And the highlighted bit says, I do not know how many yellow cards are submitted, and I'm not aware of a standard number that should be submitted. The reason the GP cannot give you long-term information on side effects or the exact ingredients of a vaccine is because that information is not available to them. Now, that's from Dr. Michael Mulholland. That's the Royal College of General Practitioners. So clearly we've got an informed consent problem here. But then I found a document, and I'm just going to show you the first page of the document because it's a really big document, Consent and Refusal by Adults with Decision-Making Capacity, a toolkit for doctors from the BMA. This is a really, really big document, so I'd encourage everybody to go and have a look at it. But I'm just going to dig into a little tiny part of it. So part of it there, it says, what information should I share with patients to obtain their consent? And I've just underlined there options for treatment, including the options of no treatment, risks and potential side effects, and adverse outcomes, including the treatment not working. Then also it says doctors must not put pressure on patients to decide in a particular way, but should allow them time to consider a decision with potentially serious consequences. It also says doctors must respect a patient's decision to refuse treatment, even if they do not agree with it or when it could lead to permanent injury or death. For example, a Jehovah's Witness can refuse a blood transfusion even where this is essential for survival. Providing treatment without valid consent and in the face of competent refusal would leave the doctor open to legal and professional sanctions. Now, this is very interesting because if we just slide to the next slide, what I found really interesting, and I'm going to throw this out to all medical professionals and doctors out there who might be looking at this and watching, because I'd really like some advice and some guidance. It says there, can patients refuse treatment in advance? Yes, it says they can, using an advance decision to refuse treatment, ADRT. Now, ADRTs are legally binding in England and Wales, but in Scotland, it's called an advanced refusal of treatment. So bearing this in mind, how should these be recorded? What should we do to actually, what does this mean, an ADRT? So if we go and look further and see how they should be recorded and what they're for, it says here, nevertheless, doctors who are informed of the existence of an ADRT must take steps to find it, and doctors who receive inquiries about the existence of an advance decision from another health professional should provide them with a copy of the document without delay. And it also gives other options there. Now, my question on all of this is advance decision to refuse treatment is normally for people that are coming to end of life, that maybe they're very sick and they need to be, that they're going to at some point be put on a ventilator, and what would their wishes be in advance? So we can see that the NHS has got an advanced decisions to refuse treatments coupled up with end of care, palliative care website. I think we might just have a screenshot of that, hopefully the National Council for Palliative Care, and advanced decisions to refuse treatment. So you can see where this is tied in. However, what I'm thinking, and I spoke to a couple of doctors about this ADRT, what is an ADRT? Because if an ADRT is normally used for people to make plans in advance of their death, what does it mean in our language? And what it means is a living will. Now, I didn't really know much about living wills at all, but a living will is completely different from an ordinary will when you've actually passed away. So what a living will does is it gives your wishes. Now, hypothetically, and this is where I'm going to throw it out to anybody within the legal profession, any medics out there, anybody from the NHS, could we, therefore, write a living will to say that we refuse COVID-19 therapies, such as Ronapreve, remdesivir, monoclonal antibodies? Could we say that we would refuse to go to an NHS facility for any other reason? Because if so, that would mean possibly that there would be the option for, once this is in place, and you can make it yourself, you don't have to go to a lawyer. So look into a living will, because once you've made a living will, you have to make that will available to your doctor, so your doctor knows that it actually exists. And I'm thinking to myself, would this lead to possibly some of us having to wear maybe fluorescent armbands to say that we don't want specific treatment? And this is where it takes me back to the article that I was referring to in my blog, by the side of my blog, Scared of the NHS, because many, many people are terrified of going to the NHS. So what else might you think about making an ADRT for? Because what's worrying at the moment is we've got false teams in place. So we've got a Frailty toolkit that's being used. Now, I don't know who is being scored on these Frailty toolkits, but I presume it's vulnerable people, maybe people with disabilities and elderly. And it seems that the NHS will grade us. They'll actually use this clinical scorecard. And it says people with severe frailty can be moving towards the end of life. So when we look at frailty, we see actually who's been scored, who's actually got a score against them, and what does this score mean? Because currently at the moment, if somebody falls at home, they will get a falls team come to see them. Now, that's normally within 2 hours of falling. And I'm speaking to nurses who are telling me that if somebody's broken their leg or their arm and they're elderly or at home, they're literally being visited, getting a brace and getting morphine and being left at home, and then they're being checked every single day. So this falls team is in place now. Now, the clinical frailty score that we just spoke about, what could that lead to? Well, what I found it led to was something that was triggered by our guest, which is something called anticipatory care. Now, anticipatory care is the term that's used in Scotland predominantly. In England, we can call it advanced decisions, or they sometimes call it anticipatory care. And the anticipatory care pathway is literally what happens if that patient becomes frail, becomes ill. What can we do for that patient in of course, their best interests? And clearly you can see the link there to end of life care. So my question, I think, and we will see a very, very short video on anticipatory care, but my question really for anybody that's in the NHS at the moment, I would really like to know, is anticipatory care being twisted a little bit and being used as a mechanism to support a do not resuscitate notice, or to push somebody or accelerate them into an end of life care? So I think my big question is, should we be freedom of informationing our GPs to ask them, have we been scored on the clinical frailty score? If we have, what is our score? What does that mean to our general demeanour? Does it mean we've had a DNR placed on us? Does it mean that we've got an anticipatory care programme looming for us? What does it mean? So unless we ask these questions, we're never going to know. But there's a very, very short little video. I'm sorry it's a bit childish. It was the shortest one I could find on anticipatory care.
Sometimes people worry that their health might get worse in the future. This might be because they are getting older or have noticed that they are becoming more frail. Or some people have long-term health conditions and might think that these will get worse over time. If you're worried that your health might change in the future, there are plans you can make to help you feel more prepared. In the NHS and care services in Scotland, we call this Anticipatory Care Planning, or ACP. It's about talking to your doctor or your nurse or another carer that you see often and discussing treatment, care or support that you might need in the future. You can ask any questions you have, discuss anything that is on your mind, and get an idea of what options might realistically be available to you. It can be helpful to involve family and friends in these discussions. All of this gives you a chance to tell people what matters to you. Your doctor, nurse, or carer can write this down. Important parts of your plan can be shared safely with other professionals when needed, for example, NHS 24 staff, the ambulance service, and local hospitals. Your anticipatory care plan can be changed later on if you want. It is impossible to make definite plans for the future, but having these discussions and writing them down helps your family, your doctors, your nurses, and everyone else involved in your care to know what you would like to happen if your health changes. On the NHS Inform website, we have information about anticipatory care planning that will help you learn more about what you can do to plan ahead for the future.
Now, I don't believe those discussions are taking place. I don't believe families are being consulted with regards to anticipatory care. I don't believe that families are even being told that DNR notices are being issued. So my question really to everybody is, are you subjected to anticipatory care? What is your clinical frail score? And if you don't know, please find out.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. David, you've got some on this as well.
Yes, so we have here from a UK column viewer a form that she posted on Twitter. And this is a do not attempt cardiopulmonary resuscitation, DNACPR, notice from NHS Scotland. And you see here it's been filled in by a doctor who's ticked the box, and it's only one tick basically in the entire front page of this. And it says CPR will not be successful and is not a treatment option for this patient. So this is basically a do not resuscitate instruction for the NHS. And it says, explain why. Patient has significant comorbidities. And it then said, the patient is aware of this decision, yes, conversation date and where documented, or no, reason, lack of capacity, judgment of harm to patient, not filled in. And then welfare attorney, guardian, relevant is aware of this decision, not filled in. And it then says the presumption is that the patient and those close to the patient who lacks capacity will be aware of the DNACPR decision. See decision-making framework for valid exceptions. Where the conversation has not yet happened, the full explanation and a clear plan to revisit this must be documented in the clinical notes. So you see there are protections and requirements to communicate. So we'd like to welcome Kelly Easton to the UK Column News today. Kelly, this concerns your grandmother. Tell us, the doctor hadn't filled in the form to say whether or not the patient was aware of the decision. Was your grandmother aware of this decision?
No. No, we were not aware. None of us, the family, my grandmother, no, we were not aware. It was a huge shock.
So this came out of the blue. I understand, we've had a chat before. I understand that your grandmother had a relatively short stay in hospital, was discharged, and then a little short while after discharge, this came along. So there'd been no communication, no discussion. How did your grandmother react when you finally told her that this notice had been issued?
She was dreadfully upset. You know, I had to have this conversation over our kitchen table whilst she was at her lunch, explaining exactly what this meant. She was in pieces. She was absolutely destroyed. She kept asking who would do this and why. You know, it was horrible.
Yes. I just for a little bit of context, your grandmother, she's living independently. She's obviously she's elderly, but she's still living independently and isn't ready to cash in her chips yet. Is this the situation? She's not someone who would have agreed to this had she known. Is that correct?
Absolutely not. My granny's a total fighter. She's fiercely independent, fiercely, and she does live at home, though she is elderly. She doesn't have any really big bad comorbidities. She's about as healthy as she can get for her age.
Right. Okay. So you've obviously fought this, and you've gone to the doctor who signed it. So firstly, as we'll see shortly, I've got a bit of guidance documentation. This has to be an individual decision. Did the doctor examine your grandmother before he signed this?
No, this doctor hadn't seen my grandmother in over 2 years.
Okay, so what gave him a spur to actually fill this form in? Where did the impetus come from?
So he claimed he'd received an email from the hospital requesting that he do a copy of a DNR that was already in place while she was in hospital on her stay.
And did you know about that DNR?
No.
No. Okay. Okay, so he was told by the hospital, and I understand from a relatively junior person in the hospital, Debbie will know more about this, but it's a physician associate, which is an assistant to a doctor, not actually a fully qualified doctor, had asked for this, and he dutifully filled the form in without the family without any examination, without any checks, without any balances, without any communication. So, I mean, we were wondering just how common this is. Is this standard practice? Debbie will maybe comment on that just in a moment. I've just got a couple of slides very quickly here to show what should have happened. This is from the NHS website, talking about these DNACPR decisions. They're saying that you must be told that the form has been completed for you, so they failed there. The doctor doesn't need your consent, but you have to be informed. You should be given a chance to understand what it is. They failed in that one too. You should be consulted. The doctor should ask about your wishes and preferences. They failed there too. A DNR decision must be made on an individual person-by-person basis. This must be based on your health needs and priorities as an individual. Well, they didn't establish the priorities of your grandmother as an individual, so they failed in that one too. And finally, they say, what should you do if you're concerned about a DNACPR form? And this is one of the messages I want to get across to our audience today, that you have had this rescinded and you have successfully fought this. But even on the NHS website, and before they go into complaints procedures, which are pretty much a waste of time in our experience, they say the first thing you should do is you should raise it with your doctor. And if you're still not happy, get a second opinion. So these are sensible things. So you raised it with the doctor. What happened then?
So the doctor obviously was apologising profusely for not dotting the I's and crossing the T's and all that stuff. He assumed that the conversation had taken place in hospital because that's the procedure. So he rescinded it immediately with immediate effect. And then he printed this email request from the hospital for me to collect, which I did. Monday I received a copy of his notes, and that threw up that my granny had been admitted with sepsis and confusion, thereby removing her capacity. This was not her diagnosis. This is not what she was treated for. It's dark. It's really dark, and people need to know this is happening.
So what would your advice to people watching this who have elderly relatives, perhaps in a similar situation? What would you suggest that they do to ensure their safety?
Ask. all their questions. Every question. What medications are you given? What are you treating for? I would also take on board what Debbie said about the frailty score, because we don't know how that's being implemented or used. Ask everything. Let them know you're watching. Place a "don't mess with my family" sticker on your family members. So many people have reached out to say, you know, they don't have their relative anymore. They didn't have an option, and a lot of people aren't aware. This was not on my granny's board. Usually it's on a board, and I was on them from the start, asking questions. What are you medicating her for? You know, what is she being treated for? What's her list of medicines? I made them know I was watching, and this was still in place. You need to be asking the questions.
And obviously you've gone back when you've not been happy with the answers, and you've pushed back, and you've had this position reversed. So that shows what can be done. So just before we finish this section, Debbie, is there anything you would like to add to this?
Yeah, there is actually a couple of things, because Kelly and I have also spoken, and we know that Kelly's granny was also put on an anticipatory care medications. So I think what we've been saying with regards to the clinical frailty and anticipatory care, we need to be asking the questions. Kelly's absolutely right. It's like letting the MHRA know they're watching them by clicking on the board meetings. The similar is going on in hospitals. We don't know what's going on in hospitals. We don't know what's going on behind closed doors. And I think the idea of a living will, making your wishes clear right from the start, is probably one way to go for sure. But clearly in Kelly's case, I mean, they had to pick up this letter from the GP. If that had been Kelly's granny going to pick it up from the GP and then opening it, not knowing what it was, families aren't told. The person themselves is not told. So please ask the questions, watch what's going on, because we don't know what's going on behind NHS ward and closed doors.
Yeah. So,
Kelly, thanks so much. Maybe you'll be able to join us in extra time to talk about this some more, but till then, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks, David.
okay, David and Kelly, thank you very much for that very informative and poignant little piece. Very serious things going on under the surface in UK. UK Column is doing its best to get out the information and truth about this, so help us do this. Spread and share the information, and we've shown you today where things are going with the attacks on GB News. Ofcom, I'll say our old friend in the background, simply there as the battering ram of the government to shut down free speech. It's up to all of us to speak out and challenge these people and call them out.
We're out of time. We'll be back in a couple of minutes for Extra.
Yeah, thank you for joining us wherever you are in the world. Bye-bye.